right, we're good.
Go ahead, Charlie. You're up.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Sorry I couldn't be in there in person today. I've got my wife's out of town for the week, and I'm on daycare drop-offs, and my daughter's daycare doesn't open until 8. So it's been a fun one. The bus driver couldn't make it for transfers yesterday, so I had to do that one. And it is. Then we had a pre-K meeting with my daughter, which I guess they do nowadays. You got to go for like a day before you even go to pre-K. So. But it was the most adorable thing I've ever seen in my life. They all cheered for Poppy arriving in her first pre-K day. It was awesome. I can't believe how much she's grown. But sorry I can't be there in person, but I only have a kind of a quick update. I know we discussed the YMCA lease a bit last week and had a follow-up meeting with Matt, their executive director. We've been working on that lease piece, and we both agreed that we want to come back to the council next week just to have a little bit more of an open discussion about the state of the lease discussions and to kind of give some better background on kind of, you know, what was decided on 10 years ago and kind of where we're at now. I think obviously Sunshine's kind of the best disinfectant. There's been a lot of, I feel like, kind of misinformation on how the lease was originally structured and what it was supposed to be and the deal that the Y is getting. Without enough kind of information on the cost they're also carrying and the huge benefit to the city of a bunch of different pieces of it. So also Matt is going to invite their board and then some of the other groups, the Music Institute, the senior, what's the name of that organization? Sorry, I'm blanking right now, but the
Friends in Action.
The senior organization that also is in that building, and you know they're doing amazing things over there. And plus, we're going to invite Amy from the school because the school is also adding a pre-K program that the Y is going to be hosting there as well, which we need to figure out kind of some of the increased costs on that piece. So it's complicated. I think as we onboard a Parks and Rec director, I think my hope is to have another year lease extension on pretty similar terms to where they're at now, and potentially move over the next year as the Parks and Rec director on boards and can kind of take over this project as to maybe having the city manage the Moore Center and the city hold the costs of all Moore Center maintenance and electricity costs and cleaning, etc. And then programming, rentals, all those pieces, and how that would fold into an expanded Parks and Rec Department program, and then the Y would transition to paying the city rent in the same way that the Music Institute and the senior organization are already doing. So that's sort of the initial ideating here, but having the Y give a little more background on the lease as it was structured 10 years ago and kind of where we're at now and some of the increased costs they're seeing in childcare, et cetera, I think would be helpful. There's also a budget proposal I think that's currently on the table to pull back some of the subsidizations for childcare workers that could affect things here. It's a pretty critical service here in Ellsworth to have our employees that work here be able to have access to childcare. There's already a kind of a limitation in that category. So we'll bring that to the finance committee next week to have kind of a broader discussion. But just want to give you all that update today before I send it to Nate and the rest of the group. But also open to some questions if you had some.
That's this coming a week from today, Charlie. That's the plan.
Correct.
Great. Thank you.
Charlie, go ahead.
Okay. I would just add, if the concern about the childhood subsidy shouldn't wait for a week if it's reaching out to legislators. The budget conversations are happening now. Legislature is shooting to adjourn by the 18th of June, so anything the city can do to reach out to our legislators, if you haven't already, perhaps you all have, but it's part of the mix, and now's the time to be engaging and saying this is a priority.
You know, I hadn't Nancy, but I can definitely reach out to Senator Grahowski and our Representative White as well, just on how critical that is in the area. I know a lot of our, even our own staff struggle with that piece. I know I struggle with it as well. You know, we're always dealing with staffing shortages, even in our own child care facility here in Castine, to be able to keep those workers. And then when we don't have them, we had it happen last week, where just a person quit unexpectedly. They're very low staff to begin with, and then all of a sudden my wife and I have to scramble to, you know, who can come home, who can take off work, who can rearrange all their schedule, cancel all their meetings. So I'll definitely reach out, Nancy. It's a
And I
great-
think that's the
great call.
point. It's talking about childcare as an economic development issue is critical. So just now, I guess there's a sense of urgency as the discussions are happening to
Yeah.
reach out now on that.
Great. Good point, Nancy. Thank you.
Charlie, I was going to ask you, you mentioned that it was coming to the full council, and then you mentioned it was coming to the finance committee. Is that both the case? It's coming next Friday and this council meeting in June?
No, just the finance committee meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. And I, to kind of some of our previous discussion last week on, maybe an increased workshop activity so council could be a little bit more involved in these higher level decisions. In some ways, I just recently read the cannabis article in Ellsworth American, and I thought the cannabis discussion was really excellent in terms of this great viewpoints of the council and trying to get, so having more of those types of discussions. And I think what this YMCA one is another great one, is to, to have more of the why, their folks, the needs of the community, the council getting more background from the people that have been closest to it. And then, we'll keep moving it forward. Sure, there'll be some staff discussions as well, but I could see 2 or 3 of these with, it's a huge piece over the next year with the why, Steve, to get this to where it needs to come to council for an actual decision.
I think just maybe along that line, maybe for next Friday, Charlie, if we want to tee this up for the whole council and just let them know that they're all invited, obviously, to come participate in the discussion. So if any of the other members, we've got 4 here, but if Michelle, John, and Tabitha want to make it, that'd be great too.
Absolutely. And I thought I sent an email about that, but I'll just do a clean one. I think that email was 2,000 words long. With updates on the workshop discussion we had and other things, and there was buried in there. And we're going to bring YMCA in a couple weeks. So I'll send a clean email to council about next Friday. That if we're going to have a broader discussion about the why. Of course, there's a financial element to it, but absolutely.
Charlie, when is that contract up for renewal? You said something about a conversation over the next year with the Y, but we're on the cusp
Yeah,
of the
we're gonna.
contract, right?
We'll probably put another extension on it, through next year, and so it's we've been basically just extending over the previous contract.
Okay.
August
last
of
year, as we
24
discussed
is
it,
what it
and
Thank you.
I wanna,
August of
that's one of
24.
the reasons I want to start just involving the full council more, so we can get it to the finish line. I think there's some broader organizational policy issues. I kind of hope that it was just one of these, okay, line over a couple things, line over this, but some of the comments in council about the deal the Y is getting and the community and kind of where things are at, it seems like a broader discussion is needed to really hash that out with the full council, as opposed to a smaller group behind closed doors. So.
Great, thank you.
Nate?
Hey, obviously, besides the finishing up the audit, which we've gotten them everything that they've asked for so far, and it's been a little quiet. Unfortunately, it's been a little bit too quiet, so I'm going to message them this morning, make sure that they're good going into this weekend. But I think we're definitely on the final stages of getting this audit complete. Main goal right now is getting all the reconciliations up to date, which most of the accounts are as of now, up to date. So that way we can go into next fiscal year. I'd like to have all the reconciliation done, so that way July or August we can send all the financial information and get this audit started sooner process, which I think I mentioned last week. So besides that, today is the deadline for banks to submit their bids for the tax anticipation note, which will be presented at this month's council meeting. I believe we've gotten 5 bank bids so far, and I think there's a couple that we're still waiting for, but like I said, that'll be presented this month at council meeting once we get those bids and we can see where we land. But that's all I got on the finance side.
Were they all Ellsworth banks that they were submitted to?
Yes.
Thank you. If I may, all the Ellsworth banks contribute a lot to the community, so to hear that they're all Ellsworth banks that we're considering, I think is important.
Yeah, I think Ashley and myself, I think we reached out to 7 or 8 banks, and they're, like I said, they're all local Ellsworth banks,
Right.
so.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're lucky to have
Yes.
some great
Yeah.
banks and financial
think-
institutions here.
Most, if not all of them, are Maine chartered, which I appreciate as well. So, good, glad to hear that moving
Absolutely.
forward.
Yep. That's all I have. I don't know if we have anyone from the public, but
Yep.
Sarah, do we have any staff comments or anything? Public?
Roger Gilly, resident. I come in, a couple months ago, I guess, a month ago, and asked about the city-owned property that they've taken over. And I reached out to a department, and I asked about the properties being sold to save the taxpayers some money, you know, instead of just collecting property we don't need. And the department told me that, you know, it's upwards to the millions of dollars that you know, could be sold and put back into tax revenue, you know, property tax and stuff like that. So every time I come and ask a question, I never seem to get any answers. So I'm kind of curious on if there's been any change on putting this property back out there. I haven't seen any for sale signs on some of it, so is there anybody?
And Robert, I'm sorry, what staffer was this?
Oh, just the city employee upstairs.
Just, is it our assessor, our code person, or just trying to?
Well, I'm not gonna point out any names. I mean, it doesn't seem to work if I do, so.
Well, we'd ask you to act, for full transparency.
Okay, well, it was the tax assessor. That's how you would that's how you'd get that there was, you know, lots of money owed, you know, that they're just sitting there.
Yep, so I have,
Don't come sit up here.
we had Larry put together, it's one of his SMART goals, was to do the full assessment of all the city properties. I know, Steve, you had one in particular that you wanted to talk about in more detail. So Larry's got that full Excel sheet to both Sarah and Sue. I think and Sue and I, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, Sue? It's hard to remember now.
2 days.
We had a much more robust discussion about a few things. One is the MMA kind of current status, to your question, Steve, on the individual and the time frame they came in on the sale of that property and how the proceeds had to be dealt with due to the current city charter and state law. But then also broadening out the larger impact of that Excel sheet into what is city-owned outright, and that can be sold for revenue. And then the other piece is what is tax-acquired lien status and which one of those can be sold, and then also what the backlog of the tax lien does themselves, right? So there's going to be a category of funds that if we were to put that out to auction, that we would clear potentially the tax that's owed, and then the rest would go back to the owner themselves. So that's one of the other questions I had for Sue in that initial conversation, was we need to kind of have those 3 different categories. Sure, we can sell the properties; they might be worth millions, but to Steve's point, and now that on where those funds go, not necessarily to the city, but to the actual the property owner themselves, and then what's the delta between the tax implication that is owed to the city and would have to go back to the property owner. So I'm not quite sure about that in terms of the millions of dollars actually coming to the city. I would hope so. And then there's a separate piece too on Sue and I talked about like there's a 5-year discussion previously on when the previous owner could still come back and bid on the property and other things. And then there's a repick category as well. Some of these are repick and are repick default and may have a very different process that they'd have to go through. So there is momentum. It's also going to be on the June agenda. Was discussed in the May meeting that Sue was out on a previously scheduled vacation, and she's our subject matter expert here. So it's coming to the June meeting in full. I'm looking forward to it as well, because it's not not just about the funds that come into the city from these properties potentially, even though they're kind of broken into multiple categories, whether it's millions, whether it's hundreds of thousands, whether, you know, we can even collect some of these monies based on the 5-year windows is still TBD. But it's also just getting these back on the property tax rolls so that they can be developed and that they can generate future revenue. And then a process moving forward so that anytime one of these is acquired, it comes into our system and then is cleared as soon as possible. So really looking forward to that project and looking forward to moving forward.
Sue, do you have this?
I saw you up there, Sue. So I don't know if you have any additional,
Yeah.
um,
Well, first of all, Charlie, I'm impressed. You really listened to what I said at the meeting the other day. Good job.
And those are some of the answers that I was kind of, kind of looking for.
Yeah. And honestly, I just will say, in fact, this morning I was still working on that spreadsheet. And I would say we do have quite a bit of property, but a lot of it we utilize. And there isn't as much out there that we can sell that people think there is. But that's all on the spreadsheet.
Right.
So come the meeting, you'll get to see all of that, but it sounds good, like we've got millions of dollars, but honestly, there's not that much in there. But
Well,
we'll
we're
see
working
what
through it.
happens. Yeah,
We're
yeah,
working through it.
yeah.
Well, I mean-
We're working our way through it and trying to
One-
do what's best for the city and
Right.
the prior owners.
I mean, one piece of property that we're not utilizing is one piece of property too many.
Oh, I
you
get
know.
that. No, I completely understand, but I just didn't want you or anybody else to think
Right.
like we're sitting on this whole conglomerate of all kinds of property
Right.
that we're just hanging on to, and that's not really the case.
Right, I mean, you guys are gonna talk about the Y in the Moore School. I mean, that is one, if you go around and talk to citizens in the city of Ellsworth, and they talk about the thousands and thousands of dollars put into this building for $1 a year in return, nobody likes the idea.
No, right. Yeah, we gotta
And-
find a way to get that
And
back.
it's too much of a
So,
loss. But, I was more or less talking, about the property on the Bangor Road that they wanted to use as a, possibly put a fire station in. Then the town finds out that, the property gets divided in two because there's a right-of-way through the middle of the property. I knew that, I guess the town didn't know that, and then the driveway got put in. There's just different parcels like that I think that just need to go back on the tax roll, that there's no point to hold on to.
Right, and we're looking at all of that, and again, like Charlie had mentioned, with the 5-year hold, a lot of these properties are still within that.
Right.
But one of the many things I'm trying to determine is, does that still qualify with this new law? So I've got some questions out to people, and hopefully I'll be able to address that at the
Right.
meeting, so.
All right, thank you.
And
Yeah,
Steve, I
you're
know,
Thank you.
to your point too, that it will be kind of a narrow focus though as well, and like what you wanted this brought forward for, which is a pretty unique circumstance on, I think it was 130,000 in proceeds that were acquired from, one of the last properties to go into the process before this US Supreme Court ruled that cities and towns couldn't do. Now, it's not retroactive, so we're not required, at least from Sue's research initially, to do that, but that doesn't mean that we can't make a different decision. And if the council were to want to put that individual into, or that property owner, into what the current law is on that and how we would pay back those proceeds, that's also, will be up for discussion in June, in a week and 3 days.
To elaborate a little bit on that, when that happened, I continually brought that up at finance meetings. And there was a little bit of a discussion at a council meeting, and got no support. And my feeling was this: it was unfortunate, and like you said, it might be a unique situation. I was told that that almost never happens, and so my response to that is this: if it almost never happens, if usually we're selling properties that you're not reclaiming what you're owed, this shouldn't be a big deal to fix this inequity with this family. And I look forward to that discussion, because I don't think anybody here would want to give up their property for a couple of, let's say, 7 years of back taxes and give away their equity. And I think we need to consider that. It's not a backwards discussion. I brought it up immediately when it happened, and I couldn't get any support. And that's fine. Maybe there won't be any support this time, but I did not like what happened to that poor family. I did not think it was fair.
I just want to.
And, go for it.
Okay, I have a question for Sue, but also, I guess I remember it differently, Steve, that you weren't the only one concerned, but no action was taken. I think it was in the mix of things, so I look forward to the conversation on that one property. But my question to you, Charlie used the word, the phrase RPIC. I don't know what that,
Repick.
RPIC, real
Yeah,
estate.
it's, and I always have
Real
to stop and
estate
think.
purchase installment contract?
Yes, that's it, right there.
That
Yep,
sound good, Mr. Lawyer?
that
good
is
to
it. I always have to stop and think.
All right.
yeah.
Helen
So
Esquire.
basically,
Nancy, I cannot believe you did not know that acronym, which I also did not know.
No, not in my wheelhouse.
yeah, we
That
don't,
one's,
we don't have very
Go for it.
many. We don't have very many of those left, but we do have some, and the property will show as though we have foreclosed on it, but they are still living in the property. They're technically making payments. So it may show like it's a available property that has been foreclosed, but it's not. So that's something that,
All right. So not only did I not know the acronym, I've already forgotten what all the words are. Real estate property,
installment contract.
thank you.
Approved
Real
by
estate
the
payment,
attorney.
install, yeah. Purchase, real estate purchase installment contract. And I'll get the right word.
Also
eventually.
to be, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go for it, Tammy.
Also to be eligible for the repick, it has to be your primary residence.
Yes,
You couldn't do a repick on, an extra property
right. Or land, just land.
or land, right, yeah.
Thank you.
yeah, I think this one would have been another great, candidate for a workshop as opposed to a full council meeting. We're not gonna get to resolution here. It's gonna be a long, it's gonna be a discussion. There's gonna be all kinds of pieces that we have to get to, and we're gonna maybe figure out a mechanism. Maybe we keep bringing it to finance. It is obviously finance related, so probably, Steve, I know it'll be on the June meeting. We'll have some updates for your request, but we might just keep that conversation going through the finance committee meeting as, to Mr. Gillies' point, to kind of get it over the line, get these properties back from the tax rolls. There might be some that are easier than others, right? City owned outright, the old public safety building, like piece of land that was bought for that purposes. We've talked to the fire department, now that the police station is where they're at, the fire department, I think, is more interested in the Ellsworth North location to expand service and their future needs and wouldn't be interested in that property. So maybe we can get that one on the tax rolls, quicker than some of these other ones, but we'll definitely keep this dialogue going to. And I also would note, Steve, that's interesting that there was a lot of finance committee discussions, because Sue also did look up in her great due diligence here, the finance or the council meetings on it, so we did have some minutes there. There was some discussion at the time too on just like our current city ordinance, and the requirements there. It wasn't necessarily what we wanted to do, but under the current law on city ordinance, what we were required to do, based on the process. But our city ordinance obviously now is in some ways, I think, contradictory to the U.S. Supreme Court ruling here. So obviously the U.S. Supreme Court is the operating winner in how we have to do this, but there's probably something here where we need to modify our ordinance on how we deal with these, and then also an opportunity to modernize that piece too. So it expressly puts out the process per this council and how we want to deal with these, not just the backlog but going forward. So So we don't have this issue coming up again.
To be clear, Charlie, when this happened, I don't think the finance meetings were televised or recorded. There was minutes to the meetings probably, but there was minutes, but I don't think it was televised like it is today.
Gotcha.
And secondly, when I brought it up, there had been no Supreme Court ruling. It was just a simple process that I brought up that, you know, if a bank forecloses on a piece of property, the equity goes back to the property holder or owner. And so there was no Supreme Court chatter at this point. And then later on, the Supreme Court had a ruling. Now, I'm no Supreme Court expert, but it happened after this chatter that we had. Because that Supreme Court ruling is probably, what, 9 months old, maybe?
No, it's 2 years ago.
2 years?
now.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, probably the foreclosure
Yeah.
was 2.5
Yeah,
or
it was
3 years.
Before my
It
time
was
on the
just-
council.
The foreclosure was.
Before,
Yes.
right. And my thing about it at the time was, let's do what's right. I was told at the time that it's very rare that there is equity left over. And if it's very rare, then let's do the right thing and give it back to that family. They didn't lose their property, or anybody else doesn't lose their property because they're on Easy Street. They lose their property because they're on crisis.
If, for what it's worth, this is an issue that a lot of towns in Maine were dealing with prior to, and then obviously with the Supreme Court ruling. So we're not the only city or town in Maine that's working through this issue.
One further thing, if I may.
Oh,
Charlie, you mentioned making this a longer period of discussion, and I understand that. But please don't forget, this family has already gotten no discussions from this council or the finance committee for 2.5 years, and I'm guessing
Since
that
since the
Right,
foreclosure or
right.
since
We haven't dealt with it like we should have,
But-
in my opinion.
I don't mean to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but we had lots of conversations with them during the process and that's all documented.
And I'm not saying any different, that,
Okay.
I'm not saying that you had many conversations, tried to work it out.
We did.
But at the end of the day, there's equity that, in my little brain, belongs to that family. And if it doesn't happen very often, it doesn't kill us to give a refund to someone's equity.
Well,
And stretching it out a long period of time, maybe that's what needs to happen. But please know that it's already been stretched out for 2.5 years
Yeah, and
after the foreclosure.
And also, I just would like it to go on record to say that I, at the time, legally could not give it back. Because of the way the ordinance and the law was stated, it stated I had no authority to return that money to them. So we followed the letter of the law. We are not at fault for doing anything wrong here.
I'm not saying you're at fault. I'm saying that,
I just
or
wanted that
anyone
out
is
there.
at fault. What I'm saying is it's bad policy for a city to foreclose and keep somebody's equity. I know I wouldn't like it if I couldn't afford to pay my taxes and the city foreclosed and took my property. I'd expect the equity back. And I don't think that it hurts the city of Ellsworth to be nice and do the right thing.
I'll just add, I look forward to the longer conversation. I swear I remember happened during mine and Patrick's first couple of months on the council, but
Well,
we'll
I've
go to
put-
the more of the
I've-
context and all that.
There's a lot
It's
going
come
on
up-
those first
Oh
few
my
months.
God,
I've
it was a
put,
rough
yeah,
start.
I've put
but, yeah.
the minutes from those meetings are
Right.
attached to the packet, so.
Great, look forward to the conversation at the council meeting. Thanks for your work, Sue.
Yeah, we'll proceed forward. I think it will be a difficult question, even on this individual, I would say that, I don't know what the vote, I can't remember what the vote was, Steve, but, in terms of the waiting piece, there was an affirmative vote to move in this direction.
It wasn't voted on. We never got any traction. There was no vote.
What's that?
Never got any traction. There was no vote.
Oh, there was no vote?
No.
Gotcha.
No, couldn't.
So it hasn't been addressed, but there's also a liability question too, right? Which is that this person's like on the threshold of the Supreme Court ruling, but what's the full liability? I was talking with Sue and Ebony about this. How could we even account for that? Could somebody 10 years prior say, is there 50, 100 that say, hey, now the equity in the Supreme Court ruling isn't retroactive, but would that create a potential liability? Now, I'm sure you could maybe say there's an individual case, it was right before the Supreme Court ruling, the city council's ordinance was this, but would the city owe millions and millions of dollars to folks? I don't know the answer to that question. It's something I think the council would probably want to know before they would move in that direction. And there's the other piece on where does the money come from if the council wanted to reimburse that piece as well. Would we need to include that in the next budget cycle? Would we want to include it from potential proceeds? I think we've talked about that, Steve, as well, from any future sales of land sales from the city that could be withheld for that. And then I think probably to what you need to know, Steve, and what you need to work on the people to your left and right and on the video screen is their council support for moving forward in that direction. So I'll try to get you as many options as part of this process, but I can't promise necessarily speed as much as I want
No,
to. at this point.
I will say this, though. I have been told multiple times that it's very rare that there's enough proceeds to pay the bills at City Hall. So if that's a true statement, there shouldn't be many of these cases.
I'll just, on that point, Steve, it's not that rare, or it wasn't.
Right.
I was told by the city that it was very rare that happened in this city. Now, maybe what you're talking about is broader, but when I brought this up, I was told that usually you don't get enough to pay for it. And if I was told the truth, there won't be many of those to talk about.
Yeah, but how many is not many? I mean, that's what we
Good
need
question.
to be careful of.
Good
And-
question.
And in order to get those answers, the work that we would have to do is very difficult.
I can't believe there's been that many foreclosures, that it wouldn't be that big of a deal to look at it. And I think it's been 2.5 years, and I think it needs to get moved up on the priority list.
Well,
Oh, look,
It is, oh,
there we go.
hi, Poppy.
Poppy,
Hi there.
I think Poppy has called this meeting to a close.
Yes,
First day of preschool yesterday? 2 days ago?
Oh.
I think,
That was a secret, Dad.
Screaming something in there about minions.
oh,
I think,
It's a double-edged sword, that TV.
yeah. Hi, Poppy.
She is cranky.
She
and
like-
biased.
all right. Well, I
She
think,
was,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yep.
we'll have a good discussion on
Yeah,
this next
no,
week.
looking forward to it.
All right.
Do you need a motion to adjourn, or we just wander away?
I think we just wander out. I think we're good. You guys, anything else? Happy
good.
Friday.
happy Friday.
One question